But of course, now on to the main event, our virtual book launch of The Salvage.
Awesome. Shall I take it away? Hi, everybody. My name's Rene Denfeld. I am the author of several novels, including The Enchanted and The Child Finder. And I am just so happy to be here and help support this wonderful book coming into the world. It's baby birthday of a book. So I have my copyright here. I just cannot recommend this novel enough. I was so thrilled and honored when Tin House sent this to me. It's really rare that you read one of these books that just sticks with you. So much that, months after I read this, they sent me an email asking if I could do this event. And the minute I heard the title, The Salvage, I was just flooded with all these memories of the book, which for me, just says a lot because it's just one of those books that sticks with you. And I think months or years after you read it, you just get this visceral kind of recall of the language and the story and the beauty of The Salvage. So I absolutely jumped at the chance to be here and to celebrate the launch of The Salvage. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for being part of this conversation. It actually takes a lot of work to be a person who's read the book and is talking to the author about it. I know from the other side, so I really appreciate, Rene, your enthusiasm and your effort for being here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's such a lovely chance to be a good literary citizen. So, but thank you very much. No, absolutely. I have so many things I want to ask you about regarding this book. And for those listening in or maybe watching later, the way that we're going to do this is Anbara and I, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, it's Anbara, so it's
Anbara.
like Anbara, like Canberra.
Okay, beautiful. We are going to be talking for about 12, 15 minutes, and we're going to have a little bit of a reading, I hope, from the novel. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. I always feel that that's such a fun part to do the questions. And so if you do want to stick your questions in the chat, we'll make sure to get back to them at the end and try to answer as many as we can. So, and make sure everybody's muted if you're just checking in. So anyhow, where I'd love to start is, of course, I'm imagining most people have yet to read this amazing book. So do you want to just kind of capture it in a nutshell for us?
Sure. So this is, well, the way that I see it is it's an eerie maritime gothic novel. It's set in 1962 and it follows a marine archaeologist called Marta Khoury, who is sent to a remote island off the east coast of Scotland to dive down to an Arctic shipwreck that has been towed back to the island. And on her first dive down to the ship, she thinks that she sees someone lurking in the vessel. So Marta is sort of trapped on the island for the events of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the very real deep freeze winter. So there were these terrible winter storms that came into the UK. And as she's trapped on the island over the course of this winter, she has to kind of confront if this figure is a repercussion from her past or if something really has been released from the shipwreck.
Beautiful. I have a whole little, I'm going to get out my little list of questions here. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the shipwreck aspect because this story has just this beautiful kind of gothic and moody sort of tone to it. And actually you have I think Flynn Berry wrote a beautiful little blurb.
Right.
Yeah, and she called it moody, salt-drenched atmosphere and talked about it spanning centuries. So I kind of want to talk, writer to writer, how did you kind of come up with this theme? And also the idea of writing, which can be a separate question, the challenge of writing a story that does span so much time. So if you don't mind telling us, what was kind of the genesis of the book and the challenge of it there?
Oh, okay. So I suppose if we consider the theme being shipwreck, or the shipwreck being like the central motif or conceit, I can barely swim. I have nothing to do with scuba diving or water sports of any kind whatsoever. So my interest is purely literary and historical. Shipwrecks, I think, are just really fascinating because they sort of represent sort of human hubris, I suppose, like the way that humans feel that they can conquer nature, and the way that nature has the last laugh. So there's this amazing sort of paradox between luxury and, I suppose, civilization, and the power of nature. And so I've always found shipwrecks really compelling as an idea. And this book was kind of inspired by a story that my father-in-law told me. We were sort of going for this long country walk. It was a very cold February morning, and my father-in-law is Scottish, and he told me the story about his friends of his who go diving off a very westerly island in Scotland, and that on one of their diving trips, there were three of them who would dive. They used to do this thing where they would dive and then sit on the bottom of the seabed in a sort of meditation position. I suppose it was kind of like an in-joke. They weren't really meditating. It was a sort of an in-joke. And one day when they were holding this position, the three of them, they thought they saw one other diver just sort of through the murky water, also sitting at the bottom. Oh, it gives me chills just thinking about it now. And when they surfaced, they couldn't see the diver. And I suppose there's a kind of code between divers, and they got quite concerned about the fact that they'd seen this person and then they couldn't see them. So concerned that they got a local fisherman to help look for this person. They could not locate them. And they just sort of chalked it up to a bit of a shared imagination, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So that sort of got me thinking about the idea of sort of third man syndrome, I suppose, that projection of seeing another person where there is no person. There are some really well documented cases of people imagining an extra person during times of crisis. And it's always a positive thing. Like, it's a really comforting thing. We see this in stories of survival. The Shackleton expedition, which is in the Arctic, Shackleton talks about how they actually saw the men who were sort of walking across the ice thought they saw this extra person. They felt very comforted by it. And hearing this story from my father-in-law, and being very interested in shipwrecks in general, put those two things together and thought, well, what if that extra figure that you thought you saw in a time of crisis wasn't a comforting experience at all? What if it didn't feel benevolent? What if it felt kind of threatening or a bit spooky? And that's where the recipe for the story came together.
I was actually, I had in my notes to ask about the diving, and honestly, I'm shocked and not shocked, because the diving is written so realistically. I was convinced that you would tell me that you are some sort of high-level expert diver.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I don't mess with that stuff. No way. No way. I want to live. No, you're not going to catch me doing that. However, I did actually speak to a marine archaeologist at the University of Edinburgh. So the novel is about a marine archaeologist who works in Edinburgh. And I spoke to a woman who does that for a living, and got to pick her brains a little bit about what the experience is like. And that was really helpful. Obviously, all of the mistakes and errors and fabrications are completely my own. I did make up a lot of stuff. But that's the beauty of being a novelist, is you get to absorb all of the information and then you kind of do a bit of literary jazz and make things up.
Yeah. And actually, you know, you're mentioning of seeing the people that aren't there. I'm hearing a bit of an echo. People let me know if there's any problem with the sound. That also happens in grief. And it's something that brought your book to mind. You know, I think I'm trying to remember the name of the phenomenon of seeing people after we've lost them as well. You know,
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
yeah, it's been well documented, and you know, it occurred to me in a related sense reading this novel. It's the well documented thing of like we also see people, the closer we are to them, the more likely we think after we've lost someone to death, see them. Like when I lost my brother, I remember I would be driving someplace and I would think I would see him in a bus or in the distance. And you know, it's another one of those instances where, you know, we think we see someone, and I was just, you know, to me, your book kind of captured, especially this just a sense of haunting,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I mean, I'm going to skip back a little bit. My last book, also published by Tin House, was called Hazardous Spirits. And that is set in the 1920s. It's nothing to do with this book, but it's about spiritualism as sort of, in the 20s, in the post-World War I period. For that novel, I talked to a lot of people about ghosts and about haunting. And something that really struck me about that is, I think, for me, as a writer, talking to a lot of people about their experience of seeing loved ones made me feel very confident that regardless of where you are on that spectrum of things that are real, things that are true, for a person who has that experience of seeing someone that they've lost, even if some people might consider that not to be a true experience, it is still extremely real. And to the extent that when I was thinking about haunting in this novel, as well as a sort of theme, I feel that it's very much in the experience of the person. If you feel you are being haunted, you are, because that's what it's like. If you think you've seen someone you lost, you have, because you have experienced that. So it worrying, you know, sometimes we get too lost in trying to prove whether things have happened or not, as opposed to the empirical, like the subjective experience in the moment.
Absolutely. And you know, it's whenever I'm thinking about these issues in terms of my life and my work and my writing, you know, I kind of go back to like, well, who gets to decide what real is?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, my justice work, I work with people who are incarcerated, and they get to decide their reality, not me. I just find it interesting because we can't have this dominant culture which then tells people from marginalized populations or different groups what their reality should be. I don't think we can. We can't tell people.
No, absolutely. And I think there is you know, I talked to a writer not that long ago who was talking about writing as lying. I thought that was so interesting. They said writing is just lies. I found that really fascinating because I don't think about it that way. I'd be interested to see if you think about it like that. I think that just because something isn't true doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be real. And I think that is where I've landed with the experience of being haunted, whether that's by something that you've done, whether that's by someone that you loved, that you still see around you and experience, or whether that's in the sort of world that you create for yourself.
Yeah. No, No, you know, I have a million thoughts going through my head on that. No, you know, it's, yeah, I think the idea that we're telling people what their subjective reality is kind of preposterous. And I know for me at least, and this is why I write fiction, I've often been asked, why don't you write a memoir? Why don't you write nonfiction work? And I actually feel that even though fiction is lies, it can tell actually a much deeper and nuanced truth.
Absolutely.
Because we're telling the truth of humans, we're telling the truth of our souls and all these complicated, sometimes unanswerable things. And there's a beautiful truth in that. And sometimes I find it fascinating. It feels sometimes we have to make up the story to get there.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, that's how I feel as well.
So I'm curious, you have a PhD in theology, is that right?
I do, yes, that's right.
How does that play a role in all this, or does it?
It does, because I have a doctorate in theology. My novels, this is my fourth novel, so my novels are not really about religion, but they are about religiosity and the experience of religiosity and the way that that can create certain and shape certain worldviews, certain perspectives, and certain lived experiences. In this novel, we are looking at an island, a remote island, a fictional remote island, I should say, off the east coast of Scotland. The inhabitants follow a kind of, I should say, asterisk, specific kind of Calvinism, whereby they believe that only certain people can be redeemed or saved, and those people have been pre-selected or predestined to be saved before birth. For me, this was like the most interesting kind of environment that I could put my character in, because she's someone who is so troubled by the nature of redemption and salvation and the possibility of atoning, I suppose, for her past.
I loved how you layered those themes actually of the, you know, so you have people that are diving down to this it's Victorian era ship and they're salvaging, and yet and it's just beautifully, the novel is just so gorgeous, and you laced it in with the themes of internal salvage. You know, what is salvageable in us? What is redemptive? You know, where can we find redemption? I just found that stunning.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that came through. Yeah, that's what I was aiming for anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and it's all very subtly done. I have to say, you know, returning back, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but kind of returning back to what we were talking about in the very beginning, just this book has just such that distinctive voice that I was mentioning. And it brings to mind like other books I've read over the years with very distinctive voices. Like I remember the Stone Diaries, is one that jumped to mind. And, you know, there's those books that are just so completely memorable. And I just want to know, kind of writer to writer, is that something that you set out trying to do, or is that just like the magic of your voice, or how does that happen for you?
I think for this book, there's a very particular character, so it's written from a first person perspective, and she's not particularly likable or a very nice person. I'm okay with that as a reader and as a writer. I'm quite happy to read and write characters who are flawed and quite unlikable. And I suppose she is pretty distinctive in that way. Deliberately, I was trying to create a very particular perspective that you are locked into for the duration of the novel. What I'm sort of interested in is the complicity that arises between a reader and a protagonist when you're sort of almost forced to follow along with their worldview and their perspective on things. And I find that really interesting as a dynamic, as a reader and a writer. At what point, when you're following this protagonist on their journey, do you start judging them? At what point do you start getting frustrated with them? At what point are you rooting for them to succeed even when maybe they don't actually deserve to get what they want. That's kind of what I was thinking of with this particular character and in this book.
Yeah, and you did it so incredibly well. You know, I find that as you know, also relating to the fiction telling a deeper truth, you know, in my novels, I don't think I'm doing it consciously, but there's sometimes very radical kind of themes that we can embed in a novel. We can use a character to kind of guide a reader to a place that maybe that reader wasn't expecting. I just thought you did that just absolutely beautifully.
Oh, thank you. I do hope that people have that experience. I think that the novel has a couple of ways. There's a couple of ways that you can read it. As an author, I'm not in charge of how people read or interpret a book. That's completely up to whoever opens it. But I deliberately wrote it knowing, and the same with Hazardous Spirits, my last book, knowing that it could be read in one of two ways, at least two ways, and hoping that the reader will find their own path with the character. I'm trying not to give too many spoilers, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm also being very careful. Would you mind reading a little?
Oh no, cool. Okay, so I haven't actually read from this book before, so I hope this is a good passage. I've actually chosen something kind of right in the middle because this is a slightly spooky theme excerpt, and it doesn't give anything away in terms of the plot. So hopefully this will do the job. Now, at this point in the novel, our main character, Marta, is with well, at the moment, I think she's her friend, Elsie. And they've just been on a sort of mission together. They've come back on this long bicycle ride, and Elsie stops Marta and says she wants to show her something in the local Scottish countryside. Okay. Elsie takes us a different route back to the hotel, following a path that twists along the hilly coastline, swerving back and forth between white sand scumbled with mist, rocks fuzzy with lichen, abandoned slate cottages, sheep. We trace a curve around a steep hill by the ocean, and she slows, motioning for me to get off the bike. Come on, there's something I want to show you. We've got time before sunset. She begins to climb the hill, and reluctantly I follow her, digging my fingernails into the stubbly grass, cowering under wind that whisks my breath out of my lungs. We reach a crude stone build half dug into a channel in the ground. We crouch in there, flexing the blood back into our fingers. It's a sea cave, Elsie says, as if she's giving me a present. Up here? No, there's a way in from the top, she says. You're supposed to say your name into the cave, and then you hear the name of the person you're going to marry in the echoes. The story goes that old James came here on Christmas Eve, but instead of a name, he heard an angel's trumpet, so he knew that his life was supposed to be dedicated to God. Have you ever tried it? Elsie smiles, embarrassed. Ugh, we all did it when we were at school. I only heard the wind, but Irene McLennan swears to this day that she heard Graham's name. She cricks her neck. Come on, before it starts raining again. Near the shelter are 3 wooden stubs in the earth, the remains of a guideline for tourists that have been blown away or chewed by goats in the years since the war. It's hard to see the aperture until you're right on top of it. The rocks drop away in a circle onto the gloom of the cave under our feet. The darkness inside is so thick it's like peering into a nest of black wool. Even over the wind, the roaring boom of the water inside the chalice of the cave thunders below us. Elsie nods to an imperceptible foothold along the right-hand side of the rocks, and she bends, sliding backwards. My heart leaps. For a moment, she's almost suspended over the drop into the foaming water, and then she's gone under the ledge. Watch yourself, I hear her calling. And then the answer of birds, bats, fluttering in the murk of the cave. I wait until my adrenaline has settled and follow her, sliding under, guiding my feet onto a path that slithers down onto the ring of the chasm. It's slick with bird droppings and slimy moss. Elsie hobbles farther along, edging towards a ledge that looks over the camera beneath us. The cave smells vegetal and dank, rotting and sacred, a flooded chapel. Down below, the water rolls in cannon shots, and above, trickles of rain or condensation pour in a silvery veil through the hole. I begin to feel squashed somehow, not claustrophobic, but almost like I'm being held between two giant magnets. It's a horrible feeling. I take a deep breath, trying to pull more air into my lungs. Below us, the water creams and whirls. It looks cushiony, like you could jump from here, plunge straight into a mound of lace instead of guaranteed death. Go on, Elsie says, nudging me. I think she's heard it then, my own urge to leap. I shake my head, my mouth is dry. I'll do it for you, she says. And I realize that she means to say my name into the cave. I reach out and pinch her on the arm. She looks at me sharply. She's confused. All I can think is that I already know the name of the person I'm going to marry. I'm married to him. If she calls out into the cave, I've got the sense that it's going to tell her the truth. Suddenly, I want to get out. The magnetized feeling looms inside me as if I'm too big and too small all at once. A slant of grey light through the hole flickers back and forth on the talks of foam circling the hidden rocks below. And then I see it. Him. Sitting on a ridge above the black water, his feet dangling over the edge. My throat is choked. He's come here for me. This is the place you fall from. This is the place that you drown. The light fades, and he's still here, locked inside this chancel with us. My heart is racing. I know immediately that he's coming up here, that he's going to appear here on the ledge, right next to Elsie. I'll stop there.
That is, I love that. That's such a perfect selection because it just captures the beautiful language and the mood, and I mean just that distinctive voice. It's just so moody and gothic and atmospheric and just gorgeous. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
I do love a classic gothic novel.
Well, and now you can say that you've written one.
I hope so. I mean, when part of my drive to write this book and this kind of story was my teenage love of The Hound of the Baskervilles. Mm-hmm. I've got absolutely no proof for this, but I feel like The Hound of the Baskervilles as a story, the Sherlock Holmes story, is sort of this blend of speculative fiction and detective story. Personally, I feel like that without The Hound of the Baskervilles, we wouldn't have had like the X-Files, for example. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to pay homage, I suppose, to my love of that by writing a story that's about two people with a bit of sexual tension in there who are investigating something terrible that's happening. One of you maybe has a more rational explanation. Maybe one of you has a more supernatural explanation. And both of you are trying to find out the truth while drawing kind of closer together. That was sort of the formula that I was thinking of, I suppose, with the way that this book is set up.
That's perfect. I actually and if people have questions, just go ahead and stick them in the chat. I have the chat open over here, so I can just read anybody's questions or comments for the Q&A portion. I've often felt like, I'm sure like most writers, you too have been a very voracious reader. And I've often felt like the books that we read when we're like 12 to maybe early 20s just have this profound impact on us. I know when I look back at those books, you know, in some ways, everything I've written since is a homage to those particular life-shaping books. Okay, oh, here's a question here. Oh, Liz Ash. Hi, Liz. Question for later. I hope I can read it now. It says, how did you create the structure of the book? Did you write it in a linear order or write it in a non-linear order? These are great questions. And how did you figure it out how you wanted to arrange it?
So this is a really linear book, unlike some of my other novels. They're all linear, but this was the most linear. I had a timeline, I had a chart, I had this is the thing about historical fiction writers. We are nerds. We are big time nerds. So I had a chart that had like for Scotland the moon phases, right? And I wrote to the real life timescale. So, the 10th of November till the 12th of November, what's happening on the 13th? Is that a Tuesday or is that a Monday? Right. So I wrote it in a very, very linear way. Having said that, there's also some, I suppose, I thought of them as journal entries or diary entries, which you'll see in the book. These are texts that are taken from a diary that a Victorian era diary, which is the sort of spanning centuries element that we talked about right at the beginning of this conversation. Those I wrote separately and thought about where they would enter in terms of the plot. This is such a personal thing, but when I see novels where there's an intertextual element, where there's like another voice or maybe a book and there's too much italics on the page, it does something to the way I read, and I just can't take it in. I can't process it in the same way. I feel really distanced from it. And so I very, very deliberately kept those extremely short. One of the diary entries is just 2 words. So that was a very conscious decision to break up the narrative, but in a teeny tiny bite-sized little way, so that you never felt, as a reader, too interrupted by walls of text that you have to absorb and break you out of the rhythm. Because, as Rene said, I write for the reader that I am. And personally, it's something that bothers me. So that's why I did it this way.
I totally agree. I think there's some things that can really take a reader out of a story. And yeah, long blocks of italicized stuff, long dream sequences can also be very challenging for writers.
And some people love that. It's just, for me, it's almost a formatting thing.
Mm-hmm.
That interruption frustrates me.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I see another note here. No, and I saw, there's, I love the latitude and longitude. So did you, all of these little notes, are these things that you completely made up, or how did you?
Oh, yes. Oh, no. And I plotted those out onto a map of where latitude and longitude. I've read a lot. I mean, I don't think I have ever done so much research for what is probably amounts to about 500 words. I mean, it's probably 2 books a word, honestly, of Arctic exploration, polar memoirs that I consumed in order to be able to write those. I mean, I love that. That's why I did it. But it took a lot of thought.
Are you more of a plan? Are you a plotter or a pantser?
No, I'm a pantser. I know where a book is going to end, and I know a few key scenes, and then I personally like to be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something really interesting about letting the voice of a character surprise you and letting some interaction surprise you. It's the most magical thing in writing, I think. I mean, maybe that's not in your experience, but when you're writing and a character does something that surprises you.
Oh,
This sounds
absolutely.
ridiculous to say. It sounds ridiculous to anyone to say that a character would surprise you, but it really does happen as a writer.
I think, we're writing, they should surprise us. I like to think that my characters have autonomy and they're different people than I am. And I'm the same way. The times I've tried to write to an outline or I've tried to follow a script, I feel like my writing becomes very inert. The story just feels very confined and mechanical. And, because then I'm not really opening my mind to like the freedom of where, and then letting the characters actually lead me to some place where I'm genuinely surprised.
Absolutely. And they have less agency. It feels less organic and it's less fun to write. I think it's less fun to write. It's less fun to read. I'm sure people who plan very meticulously do not feel that way. For me, it's the only way to retain the joy of and spontaneity of such a long project. It's 100, I think this is 120 something thousand words. You have to leave some room.
I know a lot of people right now too are wondering how to stay creative and how to continue writing creatively in times that are very difficult for us. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I suppose I've got two answers to that, which is that personally, as I've said, I write for the reader that I am. For me, the magic in reading is that moment of transportation when you're not really aware that you're reading and you're just turning the page, and you're almost sort of hypnotized by the story. It's for me is the most magical experience as a reader, and I really, really want to give that to other people as a gift. If I can do that for even a couple of people, I consider my job done as a writer. To have that moment of transportation where you really lift it out of your moment and you can inhabit this other place and environment, and then you stop and you're almost a bit disorientated. Amazing. Just such an amazing experience. And then I suppose thinking more critically is that for this novel, it's set in 1962. A lot of writers are very attracted, and people are very attracted to turning points and moments of change. Personally, I think all of my books have been like this. I'm quite interested in sort of the moments right before change where you can't see change coming. And I was really reflecting in this novel about this deep freeze winter of 1962. This is right before 63. The whole world is about to change in 1963. From something as casual as music to something as profound as civil rights. And so I was really thinking about this moment of deep freeze and percolation, I suppose, as this pause right before really profound, transformative, positive social change. And that I found really helpful as a writer and as a human being, to consider what it is that my characters cannot see in their moment, and also what we cannot see in our moment. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone also feeling the same way, but it was a very useful exercise for me as a writer and a person.
I feel the same. For me, I love the act of writing and being able to get into that place. When we enter the story as writers, it's very much the same as the reader entering the story. And it's, it can just be such a magical room. And there's Brandon again. Hello, Brandon. So, yeah, I read one, or I guess I jumped the gun and read a question from Liz early. So if there's anybody else that has questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. And
Yes, especially in such a rich conversation. I have a question myself. So to give people in the audience maybe a bit more time, I'll maybe get the ball rolling a bit. And Bara, you said something that literally made me like jump when I was listening. You said you sometimes have a little bit of literary jazz that happens while you're writing. And I found it really interesting, especially when you were talking about how much research you do. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about like your relationship to things like facts or
Mm,
real information and
mm,
where your kind of literary, poetic spirit and voice injects a bit of that jazz and like how you balance and feel comfortable with how you're kind of moving those things around or when you feel yourself maybe going a bit too far?
that's a great question. I think for me, I do a lot of, I write historical fiction. I do a lot of research. My last novel, 1920s, let me tell you, it was a headache because I do not know anything about that period of time. Every sentence I had to stop and think, wait a second. A woman, she's brushing her hair, she's buttoning up her dress. Wait, which side of her dress would she be buttoning it up on? What would her buttons be made of? I mean, it's a nightmare, right? It's a nightmare. And I really did not want to get myself stuck in that kind of situation again. I feel that that was spooky. Oh, there you go. That's very appropriate.
The ghosts, they've arrived.
It's almost midnight in the UK, so there we go. Hopefully that's a positive sign. I feel personally like I am not, I have been an academic. I'm not an academic. I'm not writing nonfiction. I'm not writing research. I'm a novelist. I'm a fiction writer. It's not my job to tell exactly the truth, as we were saying. It's my job to make it feel real. And those are two very different things. And so I do a lot of research, I absorb it all, and then I just there's a little bit of jazz, like as I said, yeah, there's a little bit of improvisation that happens in order to make the textural details feel real and grounded without getting too hung up on the practicalities of, for example, scuba diving in the 1960s, which by the way wasn't called scuba diving then. Nobody really needs to. I mean, the people there are. I'm sure I'm going to get some angry emails about, the valve would have been weighted at a certain depth. I'm sure, but as long as I feel that if you can be really faithful to textural details, to things that are very tangible, color, scent, weight, feel, sensation, mood, then your readers will give you a little bit of license. And those are the things that make fiction feel so real and believable and create that empathy.
That's beautiful. Before we started, actually, we were talking about seasons of life and the different times as a writer we have more or less time. And so I was kind of curious about you mentioned you have some little ones at home, and as writers we all have, I think it's pretty much a given nowadays, if you're not like a tiny one of 0.001% of writers, you have a day job. We all do. So it's pretty much a given that we're all juggling a lot. And I'm kind of curious, do you have a particular writing practice that you have that you're using to get words on the
Not really. I mean, I think that whole thing, for me personally, the whole thing about writing every day, that's for people who don't have a job. And maybe people who don't have to pay their rent or don't have kids. That doesn't work for me. I don't write every day. I write when I have something to there's something in the cup to pour out.
Very well put.
I do not have a practice per se. Having said that, a lot of this book was written in the dark, in the very early morning while my child was asleep. But thankfully, writing kind of eerie or spooky books sort of lends itself to writing in the dark, absolutely terrified that your child is going to wake up and interrupt you. So maybe that added a certain suspense and tension that I'm not even aware of. I don't have a particular practice. Do you?
No, not necessarily. It changes. And I feel the same way. I think a lot of I always caution aspiring writers that when you're reading craft books to remember that that person is writing from their particular life circumstances. And, you know, a lot of times like this stuff about writing every day, there's been years in my life where I haven't written because I was just consumed with my work and parenting. And I think that's okay. You know, we all have, like you mentioned earlier, these different seasons of our life. And when I'm writing. But I prefer, like you mentioned the word output, and I think that's a great way to look at it. For me, it's like if I'm not writing it, I think of it as input. The times when I'm not writing, I might be researching, I'm thinking, I'm doing, I'm hopefully finding time to I love going to live theater, you know, little shoebox theaters to soak up language, visual arts, you know, so it doesn't always have to be output, it can be input too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to absorb and metabolize, and in order to have something in the tank. I mean, it's impossible to do it otherwise, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. But I got into that when I was young, I read at night, and as I've gotten older, I write in the morning.
I write in the mornings too, very early. Brandon, when do you write?
I think poets are a little crazy because I feel like I'm always jotting, which is why I keep a book with me at all times, and then I have to kind of force myself to sit and then start working at it, which usually takes me into the night.
Oh, absolutely. I do. That's a very good point, though. I think starting, I tell you what I think is difficult is finishing is difficult. A lot of people who want to write talk about writing a novel, and what maybe is the secret ingredient is finishing. It's not starting, it's the completion. That is a very difficult thing to do.
That's a really good point. Maybe we can wrap up with talking about that a bit and touch upon, you know, I'm sure that people are going to be listening or watching this who also want to see their work published. And, you know, so, you know, maybe touch upon a little bit like, you know, not just getting the novel written, but getting it finished, and how do you get it out in the world then to publishers?
I mean, I did it the old-fashioned way. I wrote my first novel over a few years while I was studying and working. And then I did blind submissions to the slush pile. So basically you send it into an agent's trash bin and hope they fish it out. It took a full year for me querying my first novel. And in that intermediate time, I started writing my second novel. So I did it that way. I think that is probably the way quite often people do it. What that gave me, and then it sounds sort of grueling, and I suppose it is, but you know what it gave me is that every day for a year I would check my email and think, maybe I will get an email today that changes my life for the better. And that was a total gift. And I'm glad that it took as long as it did, because it meant I started writing a second novel just completely unbothered, not thinking about, you know, just being able to have a sort of license and freedom. And it meant that I had a full year of thinking my emails could change my life today in a great way. And then one day it did. Of course, there's a lot of hard work that goes into that, but some of it is also luck and perseverance, in my experience anyway.
Absolutely. And of course, the question that we always have to ask is, are you at work on something else again?
Yeah, I am in the early stages of researching. I've got a couple of things that I'm looking at right now. One is set in the 40s in Jerusalem, and one is set in the 1830s, so much earlier than anything else, in Glasgow in Scotland. So there's sort of two projects I'm dabbling in. I'm still in the research phase. I tend to do about a year of research before I start writing, before I can start improvising and making things up.
Well, If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to do my last little pause. Sometimes I get one, so I try and give them the space. Let's make sure we give ourselves a great round of applause for this amazing conversation. I'm going to be dropping one more time the link for this book. Please, 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 if you have not already, please make sure that you are buying Salvage by Anbara Salam. And thank you all so, so much for spending a little time with us to talk about contemporary literature. I hope everybody has an amazing rest of your night, and we'll see you around. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Rene.
Thank you. It was such an honor to meet you, and I can't wait for you to come to the States so I can take you out sometime.
I would love that.
Awesome.
And thank you, Brandon. Thank you to the Writers Center for having us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
And thank you to Tin House, too, for just this remarkable book. Thanks, you guys.
Take care.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close where we're at. But thank you both again so much. And
thank you for having us.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Take care.
That was a real pleasure. Thanks so much. And have a lovely afternoon. And good luck with your writing, Brandon and Rene as well.